time for the best coverage of the top stories in sports. The Sports Wrap with Jason Page starts now.
Yes, it does on a Wednesday, and great to have you with us. Lots to do over the next 60 minutes. David Aardsma, former MLB reliever. He's our closer, even though he comes in middle innings. Makes no sense at all. He'll join us coming up a little later on in the show. Get some thoughts with him on the wild card round game ones, all in the books from Monday. And if you don't notice, well, you can't notice unless you kind of get the arm in here. I got my Bobby Witt jersey on today in honor of Bobby Witt, who drove in the long run in the Royals win over the Orioles in game one in Baltimore on Tuesday. Sam Yarnell is here, so we'll do some baseball a little later on, Sam, but we got to start in the NFL, where trade season is brewing. It is churning, and Devante Adams is the big name right now that seems to be on the tip of everybody's tongue. That includes the Jets and the Cowboys, according to some recent reporting on this. And look, I mean, we know the Raiders are obviously in some dire straits. It's hard to believe they're going to throw in the towel on the season so quickly, but you kind of got to make these decisions. And frankly, to me, Sam, I would hang on to him a little longer and up the value that you could potentially get for him closer to the deadline when teams are more desperate, rather than trading him now. I don't know. We'll see obviously what happens, because there's talk he may not even be there. He might be gone by the end of the week, Sam, is some of the reporting that I've been reading.
And that would make a lot of sense. I mean, we've seen this relationship between this player and this organization spiral over the course of the last, 2 seasons.
Really, from day one, it's never felt like a good fit there.
So, obviously, the two teams being reported on are the Jets and the Cowboys. Listen, at the end of the day, I think it'll be really hard for the Raiders to trade this player in conference. I don't think that makes any sense for them to do, let alone in division, for those of you out there thinking the Chiefs actually have a chance at this. I don't think there's a chance he gets traded in the AFC West. I really don't think there's a chance he gets traded in the AFC. Obviously, the Jets would kind of be the sole proprietor in the AFC because of that Aaron Rodgers and Nathaniel Hackett relationship with Devante Adams. Listen, my dark horse to sign or to trade for this player is the Washington Commanders. You put one receiver across from Terry McLaurin, and that automatically becomes probably the most dynamic offense in the NFL right now with how Jaden Daniels has played thus far in the season. With regard to holding him until the trade deadline, these kind of things work out where every day now that the Raiders hold him longer, the value on him drops. Because if you can trade him now going into week 5, that means a team gets 13 weeks with that player as opposed to trading him before the trade deadline in week 10, when a team would only get 8 weeks with that player. When you're talking about teams like the Commanders or the Cowboys, these are teams that are fighting for a division, and every extra week that you could have a former all-pro receiver in your wide receiver room, it is so beneficial, and teams would be willing to pay up just for that extra little bit of time.
The flip side to not trading him now is also this. Other teams are going to lose players and lose receivers over the next 5 weeks, which means the bidding war becomes bigger, potentially, for Devante Adams' services. I agree. Look, if you're a team, you'd rather probably get him in now. I'm just curious to see how long the Raiders are willing to hold on to him. Let me throw one thing aside, though, where I do disagree with you. The idea, now, I don't think he's going to the Chiefs or anybody in the division, but this idea that, well, you can't trade somebody inside the division, or you don't want to trade somebody inside the conference. I think those days are done in sports. I think teams are just looking for the best deal they can get, and then you deal with the consequences later. I don't think he's going to wind up with the Chiefs, though. I think the Jets make the most sense. And here's the other thing. We haven't discussed this at all with him. We discussed it a little bit yesterday when it came to Tyreek Hill, but we haven't discussed it with Devante Adams, and that is the cap hit. And there is a significant cap hit for whoever takes him in, and there's going to have to be a willingness from Devante Adams to renegotiate potentially his contract depending on the team he goes to. And I don't have all the cap stuff in front of me for every single team, but that's going to be a factor here in how all this plays out, is how it fits with the cap and how much he's willing to to give back potentially, at least on the front end of this deal that he's currently under. That's something that has to be looked at as well. And when we go back to the Tyreek Hill conversation from yesterday, which I haven't read anything or seen any reporting that suggests the Dolphins are going to trade him. There are some people saying they should, but there's nothing right now that says they will. Could be a same situation there where if he is willing to give back some money, I think he's going to be less willing than Devante Adams, by the way. That would be another way to make a deal for Tyreek Hill, obviously, work.
Yeah, these things aren't so much about the player not wanting to take as much money. It's about the team trading them away, wanting to convert their cap hit to signing bonus before they trade them. So in reality, it would come down to whether the Raiders are willing to take that money that they have for this season and essentially pay Devante Adams, or the Dolphins pay Tyreek Hill to play for another team. You can kind of understand why no one does that. It sounds fairly ridiculous.
Yeah,
now,
it does.
Like Jason said, every team has these players that just don't live up to contracts that they can offload for this kind of move when you go to make it. But with regard to the conference and division thing, I don't think it's so much about the concept anymore as it is the precedent. Sure, in the offseason, you could see players traded within the conference or division, but in the heat of the season, you just rarely see it. And when these big name trades happen, it's usually from one conference to another. The last thing that my thing about Devante Adams is this. Sure, you're trading for an all-pro wide receiver. Devante Adams in every place that he's gone has been a wide receiver one. If you bring him into a team like the New York Jets with a wide receiver one who has made himself clear and obvious both in the locker room and in the media in Garrett Wilson, I think that takes a locker room that has only suffered a lot of turmoil so far in the season and flips it on its head. It makes it a tumultuous place.
Well, I think it also brings up an interesting question about the Jets' talent evaluation. They thought they had, with a healthy Aaron Rodgers, they thought they had the team that could take them to the Super Bowl. Now you're 4 weeks in, and all of a sudden you're starting to realize, if you're the Jets, either the quarterback can't elevate the receiving core to the level it needs to be. You always hear me talk about this. Or we don't have the receivers to elevate the game of Aaron Rodgers at 40 years old. That's not saying Rodgers has played bad. He hasn't. I think in the case of the Jets, it's somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's as cut and dry. Adams obviously would make them a better team in a very big way, but it does say a lot about where the Jets are from a talent evaluation standpoint. All right, we got to continue the conversation with regard to player safety. Interesting news on the NHL potentially going on. We'll get to it next. David Aardsma, former MLB reliever, regular contributor on SportsWrap. He'll join us coming up in about 10 minutes. Do a couple of baseball segments with him. So, interesting news out of the NHL. Did you know NHL preseason was going on? Apparently somebody does. NBA preseason will kick into gear soon enough. I'm sure somewhere over my left shoulder there'll be some NBA scores scrolling by soon. Sam, interesting story involving the NHL. So there's been these preseason injuries. There's injuries all the time. Preseason injuries, I think, are the most frustrating for teams because they're in games that just don't count. And they could drastically impact what your plans are for the regular season. We've seen them in the NHL in the preseason. And it's led to a conversation where, with the CBA coming up soon, Gary Bettman opening up some dialogue or having some conversation about the idea of taking away a couple of preseason games. Yay! Great. Knocked the microphone off. Yay! Love the idea. But the problem is he's going to replace it by adding games to the regular season schedule. Sounds similar to what the NFL has been talking about doing. One, the NHL season is too long as it is, Sam. And we can make the argument for the NBA, by the way. This isn't just me banging on the NHL. The NHL regular season is too long. The NBA regular season is too long. They're never going to give games back because these owners are never going to want to lose that revenue. Plus, you'd have to renegotiate player salaries. It becomes a whole headache. But for the NHL to talk about adding games in a sport where player safety is obviously an issue, and in an era where player safety is supposed to be paramount, I find it hard to believe that this is a good idea, that adding games to the NHL regular season schedule is a good idea. I know the people that cover the NHL would love it. I just don't think it's a good idea.
Well, that's why it's exactly that, right? It's an idea right now. This is a CBA that won't expire until 2026, and all they've said is that they're going to begin negotiations at the beginning of 2025, and that they may potentially add games to the schedule. Now, Jason was right. That would mean exactly this. The plan is to remove the last week of the preseason, get rid of all these international games, it seems like, and replace them with 2 regular season games. At the end of the day, in its core value, I don't have any opposition to this because of the nature of what hockey is, right? We see in the preseason, it's not like other preseasons. It's not like Major League Baseball spring training. It's not like the NFL preseason. You don't have these expanded rosters and you're just playing nobodies for 60 minutes. Every preseason game, there's at least, I would say, 1 star per team playing the entire game, getting all of their shifts in. So replacing that with 2 regular season games to me is fine, because then you turn the practice into more of training camp, and it makes rookie camp all that more important as well, because you're making decisions on those players you just drafted. When we talk about the broad scale of this, it's very dangerous. And like, the NFL going from a 17-week season to an 18-week season was crazy. A lot. If they go to a 20-week season, that's going to be horrible for player safety.
The product,
it'll be great for us, the fans.
But I think the on-field product suffers when you start doing that. I mean, you see how broken down these guys are by the time we get to the end of the season. Can you imagine what they would be like at the end of a 20-week season?
Yeah, but you personally still love to watch Joe Flacco, so like, you shouldn't be against that.
We'd get more Flacco. More cowbell, more Flacco. Yes, we would.
Yeah, exactly.
We didn't even talk about the fact that Flacco was so good for the Colts.
It's true. That's how busy the Mondays are on the SportsWrap, and the Tuesdays for that matter.
We didn't even
that
get
guy
to
came
that.
in and balled out.
Again.
And shame, not to tangent away, but
here we go.
We're going to have to talk about the Colts coaching staff making that decision to put Speaking of player safety, actually, this is topical.
Here we go.
The Colts coaching staff making that decision to put Anthony Richardson back in that game, like, 3 plays after he got pulled out with an injury, and then call a quarterback run, and on that quarterback run, he gets re-injured and has to come out for the game. I mean, speaking of player safety, Jason, that may have been the most egregious piece of evidence against player safety this whole weekend.
Let me say. I mean, it's not like Chinese sweatshop bad, because these guys are all getting paid. It's not little kids at a Nike factory. But let's also say, the NFL and NHL, they just don't care. They could all say the right things, but they don't care about player safety. Player safety is not of import to these leagues at the end of the day. You know, you can make the argument does care about player safety, the NBA, because you got players sitting out all the time, and you've got 3 nights in between games sometimes. I mean, if you want to make an argument, it's the NBA that cares most about player safety.
No, the NBA is just a player-run league. And as long as Tom Thibodeau is still a coach in the NBA, as long as Tom Thibodeau's out there putting 6 guys in a rotation for 48 minutes, you can't talk to me about player safety at all.
All right, fair enough. By the way, speaking of player safety, Steve Kerr said he's going to go with a 9. I think he said 9-player. Oh, no. JJ Redick said he's going to go with a 9-player rotation yesterday. To me, the NFL is certainly still the leader in the clubhouse when it comes to not caring about player safety, despite preaching about player safety. But the NHL could be a close second when you talk about expanding a schedule that really doesn't need expanding, because nobody cares about your season. I mean, look, we'll talk about it because we have to, and I love, I love our various guests that come on the show and talk NHL, and I'll watch some games here and there. But if the NHL lopped off 30 games from their schedule tomorrow, or 25 games off their schedule tomorrow, I don't think most people would care.
Here's the most interesting part to me about all of this whole situation with whether or not they're going to add games. It all came from this discussion around the collective bargaining agreement, and they're going to begin a new one. There was an estimation from Gary Bettman, I know, widely hated commissioner of the National Hockey League, that he thinks the cap is going to go up like $5 million. That's almost a 10% increase once we sign this new CBA. We're finally seeing hockey get to where these other sports are. The cap is at a place where it is built now to go up and up and up and up in hockey. And this is a really good sign when we talk about contracts for hockey players, something that you and I talk about, Johnny Gaudreau making like 13th man in the NBA money.
I wonder what their TV deal's going to, I wonder when theirs expires. And what their next TV deal is going to look like, though. Because we've seen the shift now with the NBA to Prime and Peacock and NBC and all that stuff. That's a great question. Because that's going to have a lot to do with where these salaries go in the years ahead as well. We'll have to look into that. But first, we're going to talk about some baseball. Sam and I coming back, talk with David Aardsma. Our reliever joins us next on SportsWrap. Let's take it to segment 3 on this Wednesday edition of Sports Wrap. Talk some baseball. As our guest just said off the air, anything happened in baseball yesterday? No. There he is. What was that, David?
Not much.
Nah, David Aardsma.
Small day for baseball.
Our closer, who's playing middle innings yet again on the show today. He's our closer, but he never closes the show because we do odds and ends to close the show. So we don't put him there. Sammy Arnell also part of the conversation here as we talk some baseball and get into yesterday's playoff games. All right, David, 3 road teams win game 1 in these best of 3s. And best of 3 is tough, and especially when you could throw out a Tariq Skubal in game 1 if you're the Tigers the way they did. And go into Houston and sort of shut down an Astros lineup that till late in that game just looked kind of lethargic.
Looked lethargic at the same time. That energy the Tigers have been coming into this playoffs with. That's the big deal is they had to play so good to get into this place. And the team that they remind me so much of is the 07 Rockies, where they played their butt off last 2 months of the year, that no one was better than them at the last 2 months. So they were entering the playoffs full steam ahead. The Astros knew they've been in for a little while, a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more like, hey, carefree. We've been here before. We've been here like the last decade. And so it's a little tough when you're facing the Cy Young winner and he just deals and absolutely pitches the way you want to, the way on the road. And it couldn't be a better start for the Tigers.
David, I wanted to get your thoughts on what AJ Hinch said regarding the Tigers' pitching plan in this series. It was Tariq Skubal and then pitching chaos. How do you think that works out over the next 1 or 2 games?
You figure it out, right? At this point, when you're Detroit, you figure it out. And to me, you just keep going with the hot hand. You keep going with what's been working. I think that's the way when he says that, what he means by heart is, this is how it's been going for the last month and a half. Like Tariq Skubal is set the pace, and then everybody else, it doesn't matter. You're throwing them in, and it seems to be working. Everything AJ Hinch is throwing against the wall, they're all sticking. And so, yes, it's chaos because now the playoffs are totally different. And generally what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years is quicker outings by starters, going to the relievers faster. So for him, throw it against the wall and see what sticks, and everything's working.
We'll see if the Tigers can close it out in Houston. Wouldn't surprise me if they did. It just feels like they're playing with house money right now. That team looks extremely loose. Let's talk about the Orioles, who yesterday couldn't get anything going at home against the Royals, who just get one hit from this guy. Where is it? I'm wearing my Bobby Witt All-Star jersey today. Came up with the big hit in that game as the Royals figure out a way to get a win in game 1 in Baltimore. What did you make of that game?
This is exactly what all season's been for these guys. As far as from a pitching standpoint, when Corbin Burns going out there absolutely dealing 8 innings, 1 earned run, and then getting out pitched by Cole Reagans, who only threw 6 innings. But that's the thing, that these two teams were built on the pitching early, especially from Corbin Burns and Reagans. The offense with Baltimore early in the season was working, but it's not working now. And so what I loved about this is classic baseball, pitching duel, all of that. But this is exactly what we've seen from Detroit for the last month and a half. This is the exact same thing we've been seeing from Baltimore this last month and a half. It's just a dead offense where they're sitting there trying to figure out. In a game where they only had 10 hits total, they got to figure something out. And that's a bigger problem for the Baltimore than just this one game. It's been a while where this offense has been absolutely mediocre at best.
When we talk about the postseason, David, bullpens always matter so much. I mean, pitching as a whole obviously is the most important thing, but bullpens matter so much more in the postseason. I think one of the most underrated things about this Royals team that we did not talk about at the trade deadline was going out and getting Lucas Erceg and really solidifying that bullpen. Are the Royals a pennant-winning bullpen to you?
To me, they're still a piece or two away. That's the thing about it, is I think they're good enough to work on and get through the playoffs. But again, that starting rotation was so good, they're going to carry them no matter what to get to the playoffs. I don't think they can quite have the pieces or the stopping power of 3 guys. That's the thing. When you look at some of these teams, when they got 3 guys, 2 guys in the back of the bullpen that you do not want to see, I'm still searching a little bit, especially with both of these teams, is that back end piece. And I think that's where that's going to stop both teams.
How about this run by the Mets? I mean, game 1 against the Braves in the doubleheader the other day, coming from behind twice to figure out a way to win that game. Both teams get into the playoffs as wild card teams. Then the Mets yesterday, another huge run, output game for them in the middle innings of this game, figure out a way to get a win in Milwaukee. And they didn't look good in Milwaukee, in that final weekend of the season. They didn't look that good in Milwaukee. They looked real good yesterday. And how about Luis Severino going 6 innings, giving them 6 innings and just enough?
Who was expecting that, right? Who was expecting Severino was going to go out there and outpitch Peralta? I would have never have guessed that. I thought there was going to be a hangover from that Monday game, the doubleheader. I think them winning the first game the way they did set them up for success, because you could tell they were a different team in game 2. They stepped back in game 2. They did not have that same fire. I'm not a Mets historian. That might have been one of the best Mets games, baseball games I have ever seen.
True.
To watch the comebacks. It's absolutely incredible. Lindor doing absolutely what an MVP candidate should be doing, was throw the team on their back and say, I got this. The Mets have carried over that energy, and it's absolutely fun to see. Again, another team that played the good baseball at the end when it mattered, carrying that over into the playoffs.
Real quick, David. Sam, I just want to finish one on the Braves real quick and get that game in. How about San Diego last night, the lone home team to win? I got about 40 seconds here. Give me a thought on Michael King and what he was able to do.
Absolutely shoved, but at the same time, it looked like the Braves were hungover. It looked like the Braves had fought to the death to make the playoffs, and took a giant sigh of relief that they did, where the Mets made it the playoffs and said, let's go. I think it's a total opposite. That's what I saw. Michael King absolutely dealt, but at the same time, we got to see more out of that Braves team if they're gonna go on, and they got one more chance. They got to play their hearts out.
Yeah, Michael King was fantastic. All right, Sam, hold your fire. We're going to get to you coming up on the other side, talk about some other baseball items and a couple other playoff items, as well as the passing of Pete Rose. I want to get David's thoughts on that, as there's been an outpouring of emotion around Major League Baseball. We'll see what David has to say about that as well. Don't go anywhere. Lots more to do. Wednesday edition of Sports Wrap, getting into the MLB postseason and a whole bunch more. Don't go anywhere. All right, let's continue the baseball conversation. Our man David Aardsma hanging out with us. Catch him on SiriusXM's MLB radio channel. Also hangs out with us from time to time. All right, Sam we were going to close the baseball on the postseason stuff, but there's just so much to talk about. Sam, you wanted to talk about some of the decisions Pat Murphy made yesterday with the Brewers.
David, the story of Tuesday in the Brewers-Mets game was Pat Murphy walking to the mound with his ace on the hill, 65 pitches deep, and 4 innings into a start, and taking the ball with the lead. What did you take away from the decision behind pulling Freddie Peralta in that spot, and also Peralta's reaction after the game, where it seemed like he was kind of done with Pat Murphy?
So I'm not Pat Murphy. I'm not the Brewers front office. I don't know the analytics behind it, but it's actually really interesting to watch how every single team almost got rid of the old adage of the playoffs that have been around where the starters are out in 4. The starters are out in 3 innings. The Dodgers, we haven't watched the Dodgers yet pitch. They're usually the champions of this. But it was almost like Pat Murphy was going with that old adage where it's just the adage we've been doing the last 15 years, take them out. The moment you get that lead, go the bullpen, the best guys. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it at all because at that moment, Peralta was your best chance to win. He's your best pitcher on this team, bar none. It's not even remotely close. He's a Cy Young candidate every time he steps on that mound. I didn't agree with it. I know he had the heart of the order basically kind of coming up here in a little bit. He was towards the end of the lineup, but then he still had that Lindor kind of coming up. When you get the lead and you have a starter like that, leave him out there, trust him, ride your horse and see where that takes you and then adjust. If he does it and Lindor's stepping up to the plate, totally different. But you're at Marte, Taylor, Alvarez at the end of that lineup. Like, let's see Peralta first. Let's go through again and see what you have. Get into some trouble before you make that move, unless there was something we didn't know about, but it didn't look like that from Peralta's standpoint.
Yeah, I'll also say the decisions in a best of 3, those managerial decisions are so much more microanalyzed because
True.
I mean, one game and you're done. You know what I mean? Like, I mean,
Totally.
in a best 2 out of 3, these decisions are going to be analyzed a whole bunch more. David, I wanted to get your thoughts on the passing of Pete Rose because we had Tom Brenneman on yesterday, who obviously used to call the games for the Reds. His father, Marty, was on the mic for so many years. And he actually told me when we got done with the interview, Marty Brenneman was really upset about the passing of Pete Rose because he advocated for him. As somebody who's played the game, been around the game, I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on Rose's passing.
Obviously a legend, right? One of the greatest baseball players of all time, Charlie Hustle, the guy who personifies going on the field, getting dirty and doing everything you can. I don't think there's a kid in America that grew up around my generation or right before me that didn't understand what he meant to the game and how much he personified that. Work hard, don't give up, don't ever let anybody get in your way. Like, this is yours for the taking. And as a teammate, I've heard just people loved him, absolutely loved him as a teammate. Just the bar none, it was just incredible, the outpouring of his teammates. And then there's the legacy on the other side. And that's what makes it so tough when you sit there and look at the history of baseball and say, this is the tale of 2 complete opposites. The greatest, one of the greatest players of all time, and just a superstar, right? A superstar in the world, and everybody knew who he was. And then the gambling. And so it's so tough to put into words and say, what is your reaction? Because it's good and bad at the same time. It's always, God, it's
complicated.
It's so complicated that you're losing such a complicated figure. And that's why it's so hard to put into words because he put a black eye on baseball at the same time. He put baseball on this stage, couldn't have rose it any higher, and so it's such a he was such a complicated man and it's complicated all the way to the end.
I think that the narratives around Pete Rose will forever live in baseball lore. It's something that whether after his life has ended now, he gets inducted into the Hall of Fame or added into the Hall of Fame, it becomes moot. The conversation has become greater. What I do think that we all need to remember, as much as we talk about Pete Rose gambling on baseball, Pete Rose did nothing but bet on his own team to win. That is the only thing he did. Now, at the end of the day, you don't have a ton of control over that. You can control what you can control, right? I'm not saying that players betting on sports that they're playing in is ever acceptable. I'm not. But I do think that around the entire narrative of Pete Rose, there's kind of this understood ego, this understood, this Charlie Hustle mentality. I think the betting scandal, to me, it just adds another layer of that ego, of that part of what made him great.
Obsession with winning.
To put,
it was an obsession with winning.
Like we talked about earlier, like we talked about off the air, it's an obsession with greatness. He was willing to take his money and say, here, I will bet you that I'm going to go out and win this game. And sometimes he did, but it ruined his legacy because of it.
I'll say this real quick because we only got about 40 seconds. Johnny Bench made a great point with Dan Patrick yesterday. Yes, he only bet on his team to win. But what about the games where he wasn't betting on his team? Was he betting on them to lose? It's a fair point. If you're betting on them to win, what does it mean if you're not betting on them on the days you're not betting on them? Or those are the days you're kind of consciously you're almost saying, well, they're not going to win on those days. So it kind of rubs both ways. Look, I think he belongs in the Hall of Fame. Real quick, David, do you think they wind up putting him in? I think he goes in posthumously.
I personally don't think he belongs in the Hall of Fame, and I don't think they will ever put him in.
Wow. Very interesting. All right, David Aardsma, always appreciate it, my friend. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
We're coming back with more Sports Wrap. Something to Consider is next. This Wednesday edition of Sports Wrap continues. Odds and ends coming up in about 10 minutes. When is somebody too tall? I want to talk about that. Crazy. I don't know how this slipped past me, but we're going to get into it in odds and ends. Sammy Arnell, something to consider on this Wednesday. For your consideration, I give you the WNBA. The WNBA, where last night Sam went 0 for 2 in his WNBA picks that he threw out to you. He said, take the 2 road teams. Take the Aces and take the Connecticut Sun. I was 1-1. I said the Lynx would win last night, and they did. The Aces just threw this game away late. And look, I mean, Becky Hammon looked frustrated. I mean, way too many easy buckets at the rim for the Liberty in this game. The Aces got off to a good start. They were up 8 or 9 in the first half, couldn't hold the lead, and then they cough it away late. And the Liberty have a 2-0 lead going back to Las Vegas for Game 3 on Friday night. I might actually try to go to that game. I'm hoping. Hey, here we go. Las Vegas Aces. I am sending you a credential request today for Friday's game. Can we make that happen? I want to be there for Game 3 on Friday night. Just putting that out there.
So this is why you listen to me about the football picks and not the WNBA picks, because like Jason said, yeah, I went 0-2 yesterday, but I'm still picking the NFL at better than 60% on this show. So
we're only 4 weeks in.
Let that sink in.
We're only 4 weeks in, though. It's time for that to go downhill. I mean, you did go 1-3.
I mean, almost 65%.
The
books are running. The books are running from the Prince's Picks Fridays on the Sports Wrap. That's all I'll say. Listen, first of all, Sabrina Ionescu, hello.
Yeah, she's awesome.
She was outstanding last night for New York, and it made me never want to bet on the Las Vegas Aces ever again, even if you're watching and passing through Jason's credential request right now, which you definitely should.
You're killing me, Sam. Are you trying to make sure I don't get to go to this game on Friday night?
Between Stewie's 35 points in game 1 and then Sabrina coming out, or 34, whatever. It was basically 35 and 10. I think it was 34 and 9. And Sabrina coming out in game 2 and showing this, the New York Liberty, to me, they're going to win it, right?
Really good.
They're going to win it, right?
Hard for me to believe the Aces get swept, though. I'd be shocked if they didn't find a way to get Game 3. I wouldn't be shocked if it got back to Brooklyn for Game 5. It's not like these two games were non-competitive. These were close games. I'd be surprised if we didn't. I really would. I mean, this Aces team...
You think the Aces win back-to-back?
To borrow a phrase from Rudy Tomjanovich, never underestimate the heart of a champion. they're not going down without a fight. I would not be surprised if they found ways to get this thing back to Barclays Center in Brooklyn. Boy, not for nothing. We were just showing highlights of the game. Becky Hammond, man, she got a temper on her. Whew, some fire in her belly. Man, oh man. I mean, she played that way too, so I guess it shouldn't surprise me. Lynx get the win over the Sun. That was a competitive game. Sun just looked tired. The Sun looked absolutely exhausted by the time that game ended, which goes back to Mohegan Sun Arena in Uncasville, Connecticut, for Game 3 on Friday night, where the PBS Milk and Tea crowd will be there, sitting on their seats, clapping like this. You know who I'm talking about, Connecticut, because you know I'm right. In between commercials of the broadcast, they'll probably have PBS donation ads up on the screen. Because that's who watches and that's who supports that team.
Alyssa Thomas is so good at basketball, and it is so fun to watch her play basketball.
Yep.
3 assists shy of a triple-double in this game. Truly, truly impressive stuff. I think that the MVP conversation next year is going to be very interesting, the preseason MVP conversation. After everything that you've had everywhere in the WNBA at the end of this season, but like you've got to imagine that Stewie's up there, you've got to imagine Sabrina's up there, Alyssa Thomas will be up there, obviously Asia's going to be the favorite. Where does Caitlin fall? All of these things are very, very interesting. Not to get too ahead of ourselves, obviously, but I do think that I do think, Jason, that we agree on the fact that whoever wins this series will be coming in second in the WNBA this year.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not necessarily there yet. Connecticut's due. They're certainly due for a.
You think they're beating the Liberty or the Aces?
I think they have a better chance to beat the Aces because the Aces have been very up and down this year.
I agree.
I think they have a better chance to beat the Aces, but I mean, Alyssa Thomas is a big factor. Real quick. Good news is WNBA playoff ratings are up, even in the non-Caitlin Clark games. Here's the bad news. I think the last Caitlin Clark game against the Connecticut Sun did like 2.3 or 2.4 million viewers. It was a huge number for her final game against the Sun. Over the weekend, the highest rated game for the WNBA playoffs was like 998,000. That is a huge drop-off. For everybody who wants to sit there and say, well, it's not about Caitlin Clark, it's about this, it's about that, it's about the other thing. This is exactly why the WNBA hesitated to criticize the racism, the misogyny, all of this stuff we saw. They didn't want to turn away those Caitlin Clark fans that have been showing up in big numbers all year long. People may not like to hear that, but it's the truth. And you've seen a huge drop-off. Still big numbers for the WNBA postseason, and still a rise, but there's no denying it. Caitlin Clark is the draw. We're coming back. Odds and Ends wraps it up. More basketball talk, but not in the way you would think. Next. All right, just about time to put the wraps on this baby. Before we do, a reminder. Make sure to check out SportsWrap with Jason Page, the podcast. It's available every day, and it's everything we do here on the show, just available in a podcast. It's available most afternoons during the week. Well, all afternoons during the week. Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Odyssey, Amazon, they got it. Go and check it out. Without any further delay, Sammy Arnell, time for some odds and ends. Odds and ends, something a little different today to finish the show. I was doing some prep for today's show and came across the story of this 7'3", 13-year-old Jeremy Guion, I believe is his name. Can you imagine? 7'3", Jeremy Goyer is his name. He's playing in Canada. Who knew, by the way, that all the biggest kids are in Canada? Because he's not alone. There is 7'9", 18-year-old. This kid that's going to be playing his college basketball this year at Florida, who's going to be a freshman at Florida, I should say. His name is Oliver Roux, Roux. Can you imagine being 13 years old and 7'3"? Now, I bring this up, Sam, in this context. When I was 13 years old, I was about 5'8", 5'9". I had broken my right knee in an accident, and one of the growth plates was broken. Doctors went into my left knee and broke the left growth plate. So it is possible, I think, to stop somebody's growth. I have to ask the question of parents out there. Yeah, it's nice the idea of having this freakishly tall kid, and the automatic thought is, oh, he's going to play in the NBA someday and make millions of dollars and be able to support us and take care of us. That's great. But what kind of life is somebody 7'3" at 13 years old now? You can't relate to anybody. You're the freak. You know the way kids can be. Kids can be cruel. I know. Somebody was bullied as a teenager. Shocking, right? What kind of life are you going to have? Life expectancy, the pain, the uncomfortableness of it all, the lack of comfort, having to get things specially made for you, all of that stuff. And you could sit there and say, well, he's going to make millions of dollars playing basketball, but maybe not. There's a lot of tall guys that don't make it. There's a lot of 7-footers in college that don't make it playing professional basketball, or maybe they play overseas for a few years. I just thought it was interesting that you have this 7'3", 13-year-old, this 7'9", 18-year-old. 7'9". I don't know. I'm just curious what you think of it.
So, I mean, obviously, like, I don't really have the wherewithal to know parenting, right? I'm not at that point in my life yet. But
Here.
with regard to, like, the Olivier Roux thing, I believe he's one of the top prospects in this next draft. So he's expected, I think, to go one and done at Florida and then go in the first round of this next draft. Which, like, that's obviously a different conversation than the 13-year-old. And a 13-year-old at 7'3", yeah, I mean, sure, like, maybe you think about it if you're the parent. I never had any friends who, I was very average size at 13.
You still are.
I think my tallest friends at 13 were like 6'4", which is still very tall for a 13-year-old.
Right.
And like, yeah, they played on the middle school basketball team. But, yeah, 7'3" is definitely... At the same time, Jason, if you are the parents of this kid, odds are you are very tall, and you probably had some sort of idea that, you know, your kid would be very tall. There had to be some sort of planning, and also when kids are born, right, they can predict these things from a very young age. I don't know what the doctor's trick is. It's like you take whatever the height is at 9 months and double it or triple it or something like that.
The kid was like the kid who's 7'3". I think I read yesterday. He was 6'4" when he was like 8 years old.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Like, I can't wrap my head around what it's like to be that tall at that age. I'll be curious to see what Roux looks like at Florida. I was just checking mock drafts. He wasn't in any of the mock drafts I looked at, but it's also a question of whether he wants to be one and done. I think he probably needs a bit more seasoning. I've heard his feet aren't the greatest. His quickness isn't the greatest. Maybe he'll stick around in college for a year or two, and try and up his status or whatever, while playing at Florida. But I don't know. I just can't wrap my head around being that big. I know we won't be on the air, so I'll save it for the very last minute here. This show will air in most places by the time the playoff games are done. Which series do you think end today? Do any of them end today?
It's hard. I mean, if betting with my heart, bet with the pitching chaos of the Detroit Tigers. I thought that was a great line yesterday, by the way.
How about Michael King? How about Michael King too? I mean, we didn't talk about it a lot with our buddy David Aardsma, but how about Michael King?
Well, here's the thing. Everyone's really, really, really high on the Padres.
Yeah.
And I don't understand the logic behind it. It's a team that, everyone talks about the stars. Those same stars have continuously let you down postseason in and postseason out. So I don't think that series ends today, but I could very easily be wrong.
We will see how it all plays out. We'll have a full recap on Thursday. We'll have Contender Pretender on Thursday as well. It's going to do it for us. Thank you, David Aardsma. Thank you to you, Sam. Thanks to you for watching. I'm Jason Page. We'll see you back here on Thursday for an all-new Sports Wrap. Bye!